Members, in the absence of the chairperson and deputy chairperson, we need to elect a temporary chair just to commence the meeting. Can I have nominations for temporary chair?
Yeah, I'm going to propose John McAllister, seeing as
I'll second it. I'll second it.
it's an opportunity to dip his hands in the blood.
I would want to propose Leslie.
What?
Are there any other
You're
nominations?
willing to take a position when it's given to you, but you yap on all the time about.
That's right.
This is in the oppositional role.
In the absence of other nominations, Joe McAllister, take the chair, please.
There's your chance to
Thanks,
shine,
Peter,
John.
for being so quick.
It's your big chance, lad.
Does he get a share of the chair's wages for the year on a pro rata basis?
Yes, so
Great.
I get my.
I put $250 in my pocket if you want to.
They just give it in cash then. Right, good morning, and thanks for the vote of confidence. Only nominee. Inform members we're going to be open to the public gallery and all electronic devices, with the exception of the tablet devices, should be completely switched off while the committee is in session, to interfere with the transmission and recording of proceedings. And could we seek agreement on agenda items 4 and 5, please, that are recorded by Hansard? Members are content. We'll proceed with the agenda as follows. Apologies, the one I have is for Adrian McQuillan.
Chair, the chairperson and deputy chairperson and Michaela Boyle are going to be slightly late.
Right. Any other apologies? Thanks. Draft minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of February 2015. Refer members there at pages 6 to 8 of their packs, and if members are content to approve those minutes.
Right.
No sounding voices. Matters arising. Table of requests for information from DFP. Refer members to the summary table of requests for information from DFP, which provides an update on matters arising that are not covered elsewhere on the agenda at pages 10 to 14 of the packs for noting. Memorandum of understanding on the budget process. Just to remind members that in closing yesterday's second stage debate on the budget bill, the Minister indicated a willingness to resume efforts to put in place an MOU in the budget process in time for next year. A draft MOU was prepared jointly by departmental and committee officials and agreed by the committee last spring, but the Minister wanted it to reflect lessons from the recent process before bringing it to the Executive for agreement. If we could seek agreement to write formally to the Minister to formally request that this work resumes. All in agreement?
Low start, Chairman, long overdue.
Yes, it's one of your hobby horses, but everyone's in agreement with that. Right. Review of the operation of the Barnett formula. We have a briefing from an expert witness, Professor Colin Thean. Is my pronouncing that right? This session has been allocated 40 minutes and should be completed by about 10:50. Refer members to the documents in the packs. I have a preparation sheet at pages 16 to 18 of the pack. And there's a note on Professor Thean at page 19 of the pack, and the terms of reference are in the packs at page 20. If we could have a quick maybe run through as to who was taking what questions. Have you got it written?
Just a list there. Do you want to cover the first one, Chair?
Right. Leslie's taken 2. Peter, you're on 7 and 8. Ian or Judith? You want? I will take. So are we ready then to begin the session?
Phantom of the Opera.
Good morning,
Good
Professor.
Good morning.
That's,
Can you see me?
yes, good, thank you.
Yeah. You're in full view.
Can you hear everybody okay?
I'm losing you every now and again.
Right.
You
Well,
go off and then in.
We will try and hopefully everyone will speak slowly and clearly as possible, and we'll get through this. You're very welcome, Professor, to make some opening remarks round the Barnett formula, if that would be useful, and then we would ask you some questions. But you're welcome to the committee, and I'll now ask you to present to the committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you in what I think is a very good investigation. I'm very impressed by the material that you've already collected from other colleagues. Bit of biographical detail. I've been working on the Treasury and public spending for 31 years now, man and boy. I've worked on the Treasury under New Labour is the latest thing that I've been doing. I gave evidence to the House of Lords Committee on the Barnett formula, which I think a number of your evidence givers have done as well. I want to make about your inquiry. I think you've had a very good series of evidence-giving sessions that will have really taken you through some of the big issues of the minutiae of the operation of the Barnett formula. I think my help to you might actually be to suggest some of the bigger questions that you have in your terms of reference. The lack of transparency of the data, which you note. I think there is a huge issue about making sure that the public are more aware of how public spending consequentials come from London to the devolved administrations. I think there is a bigger question about how we run our devolved fiscal system, which I know your terms of reference don't go as far as that, but there are, given the potential devolution of corporation tax to Northern Ireland, I think longevity of the Barnett as a structure allocating resources from London to the rest of the United Kingdom. I think there's also a general question that you raise in your terms of reference and the general discussions you've had so far about the independence of having an arbiter outside of the Treasury. I think this is long overdue. I think the obvious case is the Office for Budget Responsibility, partly because they're used to going into Treasury officials, they're used to going into Treasury divisions, they're well aware of the kind of the technical questions that might arise, and they certainly could get that expertise. They need a lot more investment of resources. They also need to be taken physically out of the Treasury, but that's a kind of separate question. I hope that helps.
It does indeed. Thank you. That's been very useful because there's, I mean, some of the recurring themes. I should maybe just say at the outset, my name is John McAllister. I'm a temporary chair as today, and if I could just ask members to introduce themselves,
Thank you very much.
that might be useful. I would also, I mean, some of the recurring themes that we're getting on these evidence sessions is around that lack of data and how maybe decisions are being made. And I think your points around looking at this, you know, I'd be interested around that sort of independent, the role of the OBR around how you might arbitrate between devolved regions and nations of the UK and like central government and the Treasury. If I could maybe just start by asking you about what we maybe think of as the Barnett squeeze on convergence between public spending per head of population in Northern Ireland and the UK average. Just with regard to what are the risks of Northern Ireland being underfunded in terms of relative need in a future due to long-term convergence, and secondly, in circumstances arise in the longer term? How feasible might it be to introduce a supplementary or a top-up mechanism to take account of relative need?
They're very good questions, and they've resonated around the whole history of the Barnett formula, which, as you were being told, was never intended to last this long. It was a fix for a potential needs assessed based system of allocation of resources. I think there are real dangers if Scotland is given far more autonomy, if Barnett becomes less significant for the big player in the evolution of resources, which is invariably going to be Scotland given its size. The only way as much of a squeeze is, as some of your other evidence givers have told you, is because of the things outside the formula. The either big outside Barnett, a historical process where Northern Ireland agencies and the Treasury have debated whether elements of public spending are not consequential on happenings in England. And therefore, there's been a case for special dispensation. That's helped a little bit on the squeeze, but the biggest is because of the aggregate managed spending, the demand-led spending on social welfare, that is always going to maybe help Northern Ireland appear to be doing slightly better than the Barnett system would do. Its intention convergence, and given long enough with that as the only mechanism, then Northern Ireland would suffer. So what the big political case that's got to be made is to go back to that work that the Treasury was doing in the 70s to say, how could we have a needs-based system where we assess the particular needs of not just Northern Ireland, but Wales, and if we have a regional structure that comes out of further discussions about the evolution in England, whether we can have needs assessment of the North East and the South West. And I think that is eminently, but I think it requires the political will to say needs have to be addressed, as opposed to a kind of useful political administrative tool that involves all the problems really being turned into a formula. And that's been very helpful. It's avoided the Treasury having to walk all over every part of the United Kingdom's public spending decisions. It's kept Northern Ireland out of having to have a Treasury visit, which probably has some benefits. Means that the Department of Finance and Personnel can be more autonomous. But maybe that's at a cost of not having a proper discussion about Northern Ireland's particular needs, social deprivation needs in particular, that need to be addressed through a separate allocation of resources.
I mean, thank you for that. I suppose a couple of follow-ons. I mean, the big concern here would be moving away from Barnett, and we've been warned by other academics giving evidence to the committee about the shock, and indeed any transition period would need to be considerable length of time, because we're already seeing evidence that the Welsh are suffering quite badly because of convergence, and that we would need a considerable length of time if you were to change the formula from Barnett to needs-based, that effectively the Northern Ireland economy or couldn't sustain that shock to the system. You would need a considerable length of time to move to that system.
Yes, and I think one of the problems we have in the whole way in which our fiscal structure is incrementally, almost happen-chancely evolving, is we haven't had the discussion about what are we trying to do with the allocation mechanism from open. What are we trying to achieve? I mean, the incredible decision to allow Northern Ireland potentially to have devolved authority for corporation tax, I never thought that would ever be granted, but that of itself will cause problems for Barnett if it does get implemented, because the Treasury will have to take off the notional allocation of resources that would come out of that revenue stream. So that of itself would already start a process of adjusting Barnett. The other thing that I think needs to be, we always need to preface this, Barnett works very well when it's incremental rises. It doesn't work as well when there are decremental cuts. And in a period of austerity, the consequentials are going down in some programs. So it makes it harder for any devolved administration to kind of weather the costs, which may be differentially more significant for Wales and Northern Ireland. Scotland has its own capacity maybe to use resources to kind of manage some of that. Wales and Northern Ireland maybe don't have those reserves of revenue that they can draw on. And therefore they're particularly vulnerable to a period of austerity. And I think we're talking about potentially changing Barnett at a completely different time than was mooted under New Labour, that maybe Barnett need to be looked at again. It wasn't. And when there was, a massive increase in public spending generally, we're not in that world now. Therefore, the problems can be exacerbated for Northern Ireland's continuity and structure. And I think that's a fair point. But I think we need to do the work, and I think we need to make the case that the various parts of the United Kingdom do have needs that have to be addressed through something that isn't just an arithmetic formula on English expenditure decisions.
Thank you for that, Colin. I'm going to hand over now to Leslie Cree.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning, Professor. You have touched on... You're still there, good?
Yes.
You did touch on corporation tax. Obviously, with the imminent devolution of that, hopefully to Northern Ireland, and a wider debate on fiscal powers being devolved, what potential implications do you foresee from such developments to the Barnett formula? And could I just say to you that some of the expert witnesses we've had already have advised that because of that, the calculations for reducing the block grant will in fact become, their words, increasingly notional with the lapse of time following tax has been devolved. What are your thoughts on that, Professor?
Yeah, that's a perfect use of words. Looking at all the advice that's coming out of the Treasury on how it's going to manage both potential Scottish devolved powers as well as the corporation tax decision, it is really no expectation of the Treasury thinking that this is how much revenue you should have raised. There's even the rather worrying caveat, say a northwest business in England relocates to Northern Ireland because of the corporation tax variation. The Treasury will claw back some of that. That really starts to make the whole thing become almost unworkable. Whereas the kind of symbolic decision of allowing the Northern Ireland to take charge of that, given the proximity of a lower tax regime south of the border, that was a huge symbolic change. The way the Treasury is proposing to, and maybe has to some extent because of some of the European rules, it's going to be really problems that the Northern Ireland's been given, not just the possibility to vary something that the rest of the UK would have as a central rate, but also that it could become state aid if Northern Ireland has extra resources and there isn't some sort of clawback from that. But the calculation of that clawback is going to be on the basis of the Treasury's expectation of your revenue, the expectation of the size of the Northern Ireland economy, the expectation of all sorts of issues into the future. And I think that's very worrying. It was one of the kind of flip sides of the big announcement that there was a major shift in Treasury policy, that the way in which it's going to be allocated, the way in which there'll be a kind of sliding scale of Barnett, you're going to lose £200-300 million almost immediately, and that's going to have to be then found if Northern Ireland takes its tax rates down to the Republic's level. The other thing that I think is worrying that we have to really watch very closely for both Scotland and Northern Ireland is the expectation that the rules will take your corporation tax down to a level, and then there's an assumption that you will then raise the revenue yourself. So it's not like everything being kept the same and then a decision to reduce it. There will be an assumption that it's at a low level and then you have to raise the revenue up to that level. That creates all sorts of potential problems of estimates and delays in data collection, where the revenue will be coming in at a later stage and the allocation of public spending for the next financial year will already be in train. Worries about the potential there?
Thank you for that, Professor. That leads on very nicely to the second sort of question I had in mind. Obviously, we've had difficulty in calculating the likely cost of devolution of corporation tax. That's been quite a struggle. But we do have a concern that the government may not offset the real values, for example, of the increased economic activity. For example, income tax and national insurance in that area as well. What are your views on that? Do you think that has to be part of the equation to be fair and equitable?
It has to be. Absolutely must be. I mean, the Treasury can't have it both ways. It can't say we'll find some mechanism of clawing back money if we think, the northeast of England or the northwest of England are unfairly being affected by the fact that we have a corporation tax regime across the Irish Sea, and then at the same time not also allow for a mechanism to look for the potential benefits of the cost of reducing corporation tax, which could culture of Northern Ireland's private economy. And that will have an impact on revenue, have an impact on VAT, have an impact on income tax, and that needs to be built into a fairly sophisticated model. But it can't be a model that's just delivered by the Treasury as a sort of fait accompli. It has to be something where Northern Ireland officials and politicians are in on the decisions about how do we make sure it's a broad-based assessment of the impact of corporation tax. And that's why I think independence outside the Treasury is really important here. And whatever mechanism is chosen, whether it's the OBR, I have my doubts about whether the OBR needs to be given a more statutory footing and literally also placed outside the Treasury building. Got some problems with that. But if we were to create a statutory body set up somewhere outside in Whitehall, its job would be to be fair to the devolved parts of the United Kingdom. And maybe we need a new Concordat if we're not going to go the route of legislation. We need a Concordat that sets out how the various elements of the whole picture are built into decisions about possible clawback of Barnard Dock ground.
Thank you very much for that, Professor. That's very helpful.
Professor, something that we've been discussing recently is the issue of independent public finance data, and there is a belief that the Treasury always has the upper hand because they work out the calculations and the formula, and there is a frustration here that there isn't enough transparency in terms of public finance data. So when the ministers and when the executive go into negotiations with the Treasury, they're starting at a disadvantage. Can you tell us how that could be addressed in order to provide assurance that any devolution of further fiscal powers results in a fair and proportionate adjustment to the block grant?
The only way I can see that you could be sure of a more level playing field, and I kind of preface my response to your question by saying as an academic trying to get information about how the Barnard formula worked, or trying to get any information about public spending data anyway, is incredibly difficult. And the fact that what we've got is a central state making decisions, and it's basically a group of Treasury officials who work through what they think is a sub-program level of allocation. And you have a very good example of how, the minutiae include something as a consequential becomes vital to the decision as to whether something will then come forward via the formula to Northern Ireland. The only way you can guarantee that this won't happen is if the OBR takes responsibility for some of the public spending data, rather than the general forecast, which is what it does at the moment. And what you have to do is make sure that the OBR's remit is strengthened and broadened to include the discussions about sub-programme level of public spending decisions taken at the time of the public spending survey. They then would have an OBR element of deliberation about those figures, and that would then become, to all sides in the discussion, the clear, agreed position. This is the figures that we're working on, and then the discussion and the debate can be on whether something should be allowed, something is being undercalculated, rather than what are these figures, how are they arrived at. Incredibly difficult for officials and yourselves to work through this. Very opaque. Public spending decisions have always been shrouded in secrecy, but it becomes crucial. Decisions then start to be formulaically generating a grant that then determines large parts of public spending in Northern Ireland, and that itself is under some sort of threat because of changes to the revenue streams. So I think the only way is to strengthen the OBR's oversight of public spending data. I can't see any other way of doing it. I think the Office of National Statistics do a good job, but there's all the difference in the world between ONS data and public spending survey data. And it's the public spending survey data that ends up by being the stuff of the decisions about the allocation of the block grant to Northern Ireland. And that's where you need clever political sensitivity of the OBR to come in and know how to manage the relations with the Treasury and have a remit partial for the whole of the UK. I think that, if I may say, there's an even bigger question, which is that the Supreme Court needs to start getting involved in some of the decisions about arbitration between Westminster and the devolved parts of the UK. I think we have a rather underdeveloped sense of proper redress for some of the debates that we might want to have on these questions. It's all done as an administrative redress rather than done in a proper quasi-judicial sense, where we can actually start in talking about the rules and whether the rules are being adhered to carefully. I wonder whether the gentleman's agreement of concordance can survive an increasingly complex political and fiscal situation, which is how we've run it so far. So we need to have more rules about how decisions are adjudicated on, and maybe we could start with the OBR. We certainly need to look broader than that and start asking questions about how far London, Edinburgh, Belfast, Cardiff, London itself as the GLA, how decisions made have supreme parts of the United Kingdom, whether there is a second bite of the decision. The moment that's sort of locked down in the very internal decision inside Whitehall.
In terms of how the union and its different parts operate in terms of finances, in terms of what you've just said, is the complexity that we have to operate in, is that unique to the union, or is there other countries, and we've referred to this in previous discussions, are there other countries perhaps more federal set up, more transparent federal operations that we should look to in terms of models of best practice going forward to try and make it fair for ourselves here in the north?
I think you probably should look to Canada. From what I understand of the fiscal arrangements in Canada, that clearly it's more federal. We have a kind of quasi-messy federal system in Britain. It's got elements of federal allocation, but not in the way that the science would accept. The beauty of the Canadian model is that it follows the Westminster model to some extent, so there's elements of our system. It's a Commonwealth state. There is a sense of some of those shared historical elements, but there is a debate between the Ottawa central government and the provinces of Canada in terms of an allocative mechanism. that is far more open and transparent than the one we have in the UK. So it would definitely be worth looking at Canada. The way in which Quebec was handled after the Quebec referendums in the 1990s, for example, suggests that there are the political importance of it was well recognised in Canada, but it's analogous to Britain in that sense that you've got to be aware of the politics, the fact that the union is a highly political issue, but on the other hand, you could find ways in which there would be a proper adjudication of decisions made by Ottawa to the rest of the Canadian provinces. Australia, less so, in my understanding, less relevant. The key question for Northern Ireland is whether Northern Ireland is able to have tax revenue raising powers. And the problem with our fiscal devolution is, unlike Scotland, other parts of the United Kingdom are not going to really be given the powers to raise the other side of the balance sheet. So you're a pocketbook assembly, and maybe a partial pocketbook assembly if corporation tax is devolved. But then what about VAT? What about income tax? What about inheritance tax? What about the general rate in Northern Ireland? How that is brought into general discussions about tax revenue raising. And if you don't, I think it becomes very difficult to have a proper grown-up sort of political debate in Northern Ireland about how to allocate, and that's true in Wales as well, I think, and to some extent true in London and JLA, whereas Scotland will have that grown-up debate because the Treasury will assume the tax revenue will be from zero upwards, and then it's up to the Scottish Parliament to decide what level of income tax to set. Northern Ireland needs to move towards having a closer approximation to the capacity to raise revenue.
And what taxes do you believe the Assembly should have or could have?
I don't understand the logical rationale of Scotland being able to be given responsibility for almost all of its income tax and half of VAT, and Northern Ireland not being able to do that. The only what the Prime Minister raised at the time of the discussion about the corporation tax involved the package and the subsequent negotiations on extra elements of that and the welfare spending cuts. But he raised the question that Northern Ireland really didn't have the capacity to look after its own public spending. Therefore, you wouldn't want to devolve anything to Northern Ireland if it couldn't, control decisions about public spending very effectively, and there wasn't proper oversight of public spending decisions. So therefore, you have to be really careful. I think that's becoming increasingly out of date. The Assembly and the Executive have been going for long enough now. We either trust Northern Ireland political system to deliver, or we don't. And therefore, I think we need to have discussions about devolving more of those tax-raising responsibilities to Northern Ireland. It will create difficult decisions. It might create some real tensions and priorities. But maybe Northern Ireland's politics would then really come into the light, as it were, if people were talking about what would be the best way of making sure the balance between our tax and spending laws, rather than just always talking about the public spending element.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you, Professor. Peter Weir here. We've talked a good bit, I suppose, in terms of this discussion, it tends to centre around particularly comparators with the other two main devolved regions, Scotland and Wales. But I just wonder if you have any views in terms of, I suppose, the other side of the coin, which obviously, particularly the Scottish independence referendum, provoked up, I think, an increased discussion on the role from a parliamentary point of view of ideas such as sort of English votes for English laws. I'm just wondering, in terms of other factors which are going to have a bearing on the Barnett formula, and in terms of any developments from an English point of view, be it sort of in terms of what's potentially likely to happen at Westminster, or even any further trickle down in terms of devolution to regional. And obviously one of the issues being talked about now is almost this sort of super cities in the north of England. I'm just wondering what impact you feel any of that level of discussion is going to have on consideration of the future and future direction of the Barnett formula.
I'm glad you've raised that question, because it was on my list of things to talk about, and I thought maybe it was a bit broader than the kind of remit you've set aside. You're absolutely right. If there is a super council in Manchester and real decisions about allowing that council to raise revenues, it will start to directly affect the whole debate about the regions and nations of the United Kingdom being given more authority and autonomy on the whole range of fiscal matters. So, to that extent, even just the decision leads, as well as being mentioned, the capacity to have more strategic macroeconomic policy tools, which is effectively what they would be. It would be more than just allowing economic development tools. They're actually giving resources that could then be put into very specific allocations of resources to help your businesses or science parks or generate, biotech or whatever it happens to be. It could be very much focused on the needs and capacities of those super cities. That will start to colour the whole debate about the degree to which we create a proper federal system in Northern Ireland. The dog that hasn't barked on the English votes for English rules, which in many ways is a red herring in terms of how it's being framed by at least one part of the coalition, is the impact of the regions of England on Barnett. There is no allocation of resources pro rata to the northeast or the northwest or the southwest as a result of some decision taken in a kind of unitary English system that helps London. So we have a real problem about this dissonance. The debates on a rhetorical level about too many Northern Ireland, Welsh and Scottish MPs are voting on English matters and it should be all left only to the English. The biggest argument against that has always been Barnett, because there's very few debates in the House of Commons that wouldn't have a consequential public spending element, sometimes that then would feed through to the rest of the United Kingdom. In which case, Welsh and Northern Ireland MP about education and health, environment, even though talking about it, because that would then impact on Barnett. So there's a couple of lines that would kind of generate a degree of change in the whole discussions about Barnett and fiscal devolution. The potential of these super cities having revenue raising powers, and the fact that we would really have to start thinking more clearly about needs if we're going to start talking about the rest of England having an impact, having some sort of allocated mechanism. So I think that could start to have a big impact on Northern Ireland's future fiscal arrangements, which is why possibly we really do need to have a proper convention where we discuss these as a union rather than bits and bobs of issues that come out incrementally from some decision. We need to sit down and talk about how we want to allocate across the union and make the union really rather than symbolic and important only when there's a referendum on the cards, rather than important as a living, breathing entity that actually can adjust to changing circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite a useful debate in terms of people sometimes see particular, almost simplistic solutions, both of a financial and also constitutional point of view, but there's a very strong sort of domino effect on almost any decision. And I suppose while the decisions are not unforeseeable and the consequences are not unforeseeable, at times they haven't really been fully discussed in that regard and certainly thought through in terms of implications. Can I ask you just suppose maybe on a slightly different topic, and to some extent you've covered a lot of this already. In terms of advice on the way going forward, particularly for Northern Ireland, you've highlighted, I suppose, a long-term situation that really we should be looking beyond Barnett, something which is much more closely akin with needs-based analysis, be it for Northern Ireland, be it for other regions of the UK. You've also highlighted perhaps more as a lesson, particularly in the short term and ongoing, that one of the weaknesses with the current system is both a lack of independence of the way that things are calculated, a tight control by Treasury, and you've mentioned, I suppose, particularly both from the Supreme Court, but particularly the OBR, a sort of much greater independent role to be able to assess that. So, you know, in many ways you've painted a certain particular way forward for us in Northern Ireland, but do you have any other advice in terms of either modifications to Barnett or, particularly from a Northern Ireland point of view, any route that we should be pursuing that you haven't already touched on in your evidence so far?
The technical potential change that would not involve great constitutional discussions, which would be the Treasury publishing the consequentials. As simple as that. Instead of this kind of hidden world of, well, we've had a discussion and we've come out with this series of consequentials that then add up to a block grant. Why not publish at a sub-programme level what the Barnett formula has generated out of the public spending round, essentially in England, and then we could all see, even though we might still have difficulty understanding how this all adds up, with all the caveats and all the footnotes, that actually, as a beginning of a process of educating your voters in Northern Ireland, you can say, well, look, this is how complicated it is, but this is the full block grant, which we then have discussions about how we allocate. But look at the division across sub-programme levels. I see no reason, but it would have to change even more its culture of keeping everything very much inside the public expenditure survey structure, which is very much dominated by the Treasury officials, and this would involve a degree of transparency that I think would be reasonable. If you then look at them and you say, well, that's interesting, we've got a lot of money for flood defences because there's flood defences in England, you know, that's quite good because of the issues that Northern Ireland may face in terms of environmental costs. You know, you can see that there isn't parallels, why there isn't the consequential.
I think this
might help.
Yeah,
might help public debate.
I think that'd be useful. I mean, I suppose the only slight caveat you would put with that is that people then don't see that as a degree of straitjacket, because the whole point of devolution in different regions is, you know, here's a certain money that is coming across as a consequential, but there wouldn't be a great deal of point of devolution if it was simply a question of that money was then replicated across. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
But
I'm
I'm
not arguing against the block grant not then being allocated on the basis of discussions within the executive. I mean, that's absolutely essential part of the whole way the system works, and decisions taken on the ground to one area of public spending because there are local needs or local traditions or local questions, rather than just simply give pro rata across to that programme in Northern Ireland. Absolutely. But I think if we're going to get to be serious in Northern Ireland and Wales, and I think also, you know, Scotland, the debate has got to be grown up about real elements and real programmes and sub-programmes of spending, and this then adds up to a kind of package, and that package is discussed, and then the debate will be, why aren't we putting, and it's currently the debate in England and in the House of Commons about why isn't Wales putting more money into health than England, and where the Welsh National Health System isn't as good because the Welsh have taken a decision. Well, let's have a debate about why the Assembly in Wales or the Assembly in Northern Ireland or the Executive took a decision. That decision is got a political rationale. Well, let's debate it, but let's debate it on the basis of some factual information. I take your point. The quality of independent decision making on the whole budget, and I think that's really important part of the mechanism as it works. But I think we really need to move on to a new stage, talk about revenue and public spending in a far broader way. I think that's true of British politics. It'd be good if this general election campaign talked about the cost of fiscal decisions as opposed to who benefits. You know, the allocation of decisions on tax have huge implications for social and policy and equality. We need to start talking about these as seasoned Democrats rather than half the information in from us. But that's a kind of.
I mean, I suppose if you like, the very simple analogy is it's a little bit like the kid doing the complex maths question at school, you know, and instead of just coming up with here's just the figure at the end of it, it's really a question of, you know, show us all your workings out, show us how each of the elements of the equation were put together, type of thing, so that it can be scrutinized how much we're.
People that find the equations sometimes, yes. True, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Deputy Chair.
Thanks, sir. Morning, Professor. Dominic Bradley here. In evidence to the committee, Professor Alan Trench argued that the operation of the Barnett formula ties devolved governments into the English model of public services. For example, if health in England were to be privatised, this would affect the devolved block grant. Can I ask you, what's your view on this issue?
Yeah, he's absolutely right. And I mean, his evidence to you was compelling and forthright. I thought it was really good. I wouldn't demur with many of the things that he said. The problem with Barnett is it only works if you have a fairly stable public administration system in England. As soon as you move away from an aggregated to a disaggregated public administration system in England, then it does have major impact on the rest of the United Kingdom, particularly if the other parts of the Union decide to stick with more traditional forms of public administration for good reasons or ill. So any decision taken on putting that money outside the public policy into the private sphere will have an impact on the Barnett formula, and therefore privatisation is a good example. But so like increasing contracting out of services in England that have occurred, the whole debate about bringing social care and NHS together in England, which Northern Ireland has been doing for generations, but at a cost of not putting enough resources in, that will have an impact on Northern Ireland because it will be seen as a way of trimming money by the contracting out negotiating procedure, and therefore there will be less public spending in that programme, less money will come across to the devolved administration. So yes, that's why English laws for English votes never was a runner in terms of the way the Union operates. Because if the Northern Ireland MPs and Welsh and Scottish MPs really must be involved in the discussions about fundamental changes to the structure of English public policy, because that will impact on Barnett, which is one of the reasons I guess a lot of your expert advisors are saying the straws in the wind here of Barnett not surviving long term, because with all these changes going on, you know, a very simple, administratively relatively simple to administer system that was a stopgap cannot take on the role that's expected of it now, given all these changes, particularly if the political structures in England start to devolve, and particularly if we have major debates and decisions in England. I mean, the welfare changes are a good example of the fact that, you know, the devolution of power to Scotland in the draft bill excludes a lot of the welfare reform programme, including universal benefit. So that already limits how Scotland could do things differently. And that seems to be the idea of subsidiarity. That there is a political system in Scotland, there's a political system in Northern Ireland and Wales that is increasing. Now, you have a political culture in the various parts of the United Kingdom. We need to start trusting those political cultures to have discussions about a broader range of fiscal and economic matters. So yes, it is really quite dangerous to I think, particularly to Wales and Northern Ireland, the trends of policy making in England. Austerity doesn't help either, and therefore, Parliament becomes very much a weak vessel in a stormy sea, as it were, and therefore, I think we really do need to start thinking about needs rather than the simple mechanism of Parliament. If you're going to do convergence to England means convergence to England, and by the back door, by the front door, it also means a lot of the decisions taken in England will eventually seep through to the constituent parts of the United Kingdom. I don't think that's consistent with the spirit of devolution, which is to allow those parts to make separate decisions on the basis of separate elections, separate caucuses, separate discussions within parties. That's grown mature democracies that are able to allow difference in the various parts of the United Kingdom whilst maintaining a kind of basic structure that will be recognised as the Union. So yes, I think it really is a potentially dangerous development.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor. Thanks, Chair.
Professor Daithí Mackay again here, Professor. Could I ask if you believe it would be feasible to modify the Barnett formula to take account of the economic circumstances of the different jurisdictions? For example, whereas it's the case that the GDP figures are not available at a local level, could you use economic productivity or GVA to calculate how the Barnett formula works as opposed to just simple population figures?
Yeah, I think this is the nub of getting to real discussions of change, because the British way would be to graft onto Barnett a kind of adjunct series of discussions that then top it up or take it down on the basis of some calculations outside. I think that's going to become increasingly untenable. I think Barnett either works as a simple, relatively simple, the public spending survey happens in England, and then there's an arithmetic calculation which you always have to be very much carefully monitoring to make sure that every programme is counted in the consequentials. But after you've done that, that's the end. You either have that or you have a needs-based assessment. I'm sceptical that the grafting on of a modifier would actually work, because you'd still come back to different debates about different needs of the different parts of the United Kingdom. Therefore, we might as well have a proper discussion of needs assessment and a proper discussion about tax and base, proper discussion about revenue capacities in the various parts, proper discussion about differential GDP rates of growth, poverty levels. That's needs. That's just straight into the world of needs. So, some of you people who you've had to give you evidence are far better qualified than I to talk about whether GVA would be a better mechanism. But as a kind of political economist, political scientist, I'm sceptical as to whether Barnett can be adjusted again. There's already bypassing Barnett through discussions outside the formula for things that are part of a debate between London and Belfast and London, Edinburgh and Cardiff. There's already a little bit of that. There's already the fact that we have outside it the demand-led programmes. If we're then going to have another element to it, we might as well go the whole hog and have a proper needs-based assessment where we know what we're trying to achieve in terms of allocating resources according to the different needs of different parts of the United Kingdom. But I defer to others who think that it is possible to modify. I think the beauty of Barnett, as I said in some of my opening comments, the beauty is arbitrarily visiting it all the time, to go over relatively small compared to the whole of UK spending programmes, and it produces a very relatively quick decision-making process. Because once the survey is done, then you get into the discussions about what the consequentials are, and then there's a discussion with the Department Finance and Personnel about what the block grant then would look like. That's relatively simple administratively. We're talking about moving away from a system like that towards something more complex. We might as well go the whole hog. Is kind of my view.
If obviously the Westminster election is going to be fascinating this year, but if the SNP are involved in some sort of administration, if, as the Scottish First Minister has indicated, there's going to be some form of Scottish Home Rule, and the processes that will involve in terms of further devolution, will Barnet survive, in your view?
No, it can't.
Yeah.
I mean, and it can't survive for Scotland. And then you'd say, well, we're going to have a separate discussion for Northern Ireland and Wales, in which case, why can't there be a separate discussion on the basis of more data? Because it only really works as a system if you're allocating everything outside of England. And if Scotland's out of the equation, because effectively Scotland is almost given macroeconomic devolved power, revenue-raising power, and you're really talking about far looser union, then, and also there would be consequences if there was a coalition or even an agreement with Labour and the Scottish Nationalists about whether there would be further austerity, which would have an impact on public spending levels. So, we'd already be in a completely different world, I think. But I don't think Barnet would survive if we're really just talking about allocating to Wales and Northern Ireland. And so I think, potentially the next 4 months or so are fascinating and potentially momentous. As of a new government, however it was formed, will likely be the time when the biggest decisions are going to be taken, because that's when there's the maximum political impetus behind change. The longer in fixed-term parliaments the system goes on, the less likely you're going to get any decisions out of Westminster. So we're in for a really important period of time that is very difficult to calculate the exact outcomes for the rest of the UK as well.
Okay, Professor, it's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
You're welcome, Alan. I commend you for the range of people that you've got to advise you, and I think you've got the wherewithal for an excellent report.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, members, can I seek agreement that the papers relating to this evidence are published online? Agreed. Moving on to the next evidence session regarding EU funding programmes. This is pages 22 to 32 of your packs. Huh?
They are.
Morning. Morning. Members, can I welcome Frank Duffy, Head of the EU Division in the Department of Finance and Personnel, Dominic McCullough, Head of North-South Policy and Programmes Unit within the Department, and then on the right-hand side, Pat Colgan, Chief Executive of the SEUP, and Sean Henry, Director of the Managing Authority of the Special EU Programmes Body. Does anybody want to kick us off with a few comments? Frank?
Chairman, I will, if you don't mind. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to attend and brief the committee. With your permission, I'm going to focus on providing an update on the key areas of interest, which I'm assuming will be peace and Interreg programmes, and also issues that were raised before in the committee, which was the administrative simplification of the new programme and the implementation of the existing programmes, that is the 27-13. So that's what I'm going to focus on. The own team, in conjunction with colleagues in SEUPB and DEEPR in Ireland, have undertaken considerable work to develop the Peace 4 and Interreg 5 programmes in order to move the process forward. And I'm pleased to say that the Interreg programme was formally adopted by the EU on the 13th of February, Friday the 13th. I hope that's not any issues. Peace 4 itself has not progressed as quickly through the Commission's inter-service consultations, and DFP officials, in partnership with SUPB, participated in a very constructive meeting with the Commission on the 4th of February. And we're currently liaising with departments on some of the final points of detail that the Commission has raised in relation to programme content. And we're working to realign the financial allocations on that basis in order to meet the expectations of the Commission and of the Executive. In relation to Peace, the final programme documents will be issued to the Executive for formal consideration and approval before final submission to the Commission. It's anticipated in relation to timescale that the Peace 4 programme will be informally agreed, subject to the adoption by the Commission, the formal adoption by the Commission, following their agreement of their multi-annual financial framework or budget, annual budget, which is expected in July. The discussions are also underway with the Commission about a possible visit by the EU Regional Policy Commissioner, Karina Crețu, to Northern Ireland. Karina Crețu is the new Commissioner, and it will be the first time she has visited. Discussions are at an early stage, but it's hoped that we provide the opportunity for her to formally launch all of the Northern Ireland structural programmes during that visit. At the previous committee hearing in April, members raised concerns about the application process for the current cross-border programmes, in particular work being undertaken to reduce the time taken for a decision on funding applications, and also the perceived bureaucracy that went along with that. At the time, I identified that our aim was to considerably reduce the application process time, and I undertook to do so by at least a third. So just to update the committee in relation to that, thanks to actually some very engaged and constructive discussions that DFP have had with DEEPR and SUPB, we've reached agreement for a process to be undertaken from start to finish in 36 weeks. And that's a substantial decrease from the off-quoted 56 weeks under the previous programme, and it meets the promise I made to you, which was at least a third reduction in target. It'll be a challenging target for all involved, and we're committed to achieving it. On top of that, we're also working towards additional administrative simplifications for the programme beneficiaries themselves. And these include simplified cost options such as unit costs where appropriate and flat rate costs for overheads. Touching on the previous programmes, in relation to closure of the previous programmes, we're now in the final year of expenditure for Peace 3 and Interreg 4. Those projects that are still operating should now be at the stage of ensuring final delivery of outputs and the process of planning to close. And it's vital in that process that we ensure the full allocation is spent. And I'm pleased to report in that respect that both programmes are currently on target to achieve their objectives. Before I finish, Chairman and Committee, with your indulgence, I'd like to say a few words just about my colleague Pat here. I take the opportunity to formally place on record my thanks to Pat, who's announced his retirement. Pat officially retired at the end of January, but he's very kindly agreed to stay on while we find a replacement. So Pat has, for the past 10 years, has been, I think, a tremendous ambassador, and I think a tireless and fervent advocate of cross-border EU funding programmes, not only within the eligible area, but also with the Commission, where SUPB is regarded as an exemplar and enjoys a very high reputation among the Commission itself. And I think that's in no small measure the work that Pat and his team have put in. The programmes under his stewardship have met all their expenditure targets, and he's successfully overseen expenditure over €1 billion on thousands of very worthwhile projects. The impact of Peace and Interreg funding on people and communities within these islands and across these islands has been hugely positive, and I think, again, no small measure to SUPB's efforts, and I wish him every success in the future. So with that, I thank the committee. I look forward to discussion, and if you're agreeable, I'll hand over to Pat.
If I may, first of all, thank you very much, Frank, for those very kind words. They're very unexpected. I had no idea you were going to and I was going to maybe have a word with one or two of the members afterwards just to say I'll be retiring. But Yeah, I'm very pleased to be here this morning. It's probably my last appearance before this committee. I've always enjoyed my engagement with it. But I'll be here for as long as it takes to find my successor. That's my agreement with the two departments. If I may, just to complement Frank's succinct summary of the issues, which are all laid out in the paper that you have in front of you, just to emphasise that this year, 2015, we still have to spend €112 million between the two programmes, between Interreg and Peace. It's a very substantial amount of expenditure that's going into the Northern Ireland and the border regions economy and Western Scotland for Interreg. And there's a huge amount of work associated with the closure of those programmes during this year and during 2016 and leading up to final sort of sign-off in 2017. So there's a lot to be done in relation to that. And at the moment, all the attention is shifting towards new programmes, which is right and proper. But just for the committee to be aware that there's a substantial body of work involved in bringing those other programmes to a proper conclusion.
A good time to retire then, is it?
It's well, I won't elaborate on that, but yeah, it's time for me to hand over to the new person, whoever that's going to be. But the new programmes, as Frank has said, hopefully they will be ready to be up and running. Interreg has already been formally adopted. Peace, we're hopeful that over the coming weeks, months, that we will get to a stage where we can. But again, also just to mention, there are quite a number of technical issues between ourselves and the Member States which we are discussing at the moment in terms of the details of the implementation of the programme that still have to be agreed, and most notably the practicalities of making sure that we can achieve that target of 36 weeks in terms of project assessment. Confident we will have a good outcome, but there's still a lot of work to be done there, and I know Frank would agree with me that we still need to put that to bed. So that's really it, and I'm very happy to take any questions you may have. Chairman.
In terms of Peace, what kind of timeline is there now for Peace 4? And I'm thinking in terms of the many groups within the community who have seen Peace 4, the new funding being opened, and have perhaps been in discussions with other bodies such as the councils to try and get match funding lined up. Is there a danger now with a bit of slippage that some of those proposals may not go ahead, or what kind of timescale are we on?
Chairman, if I'll touch on that first and then I'll hand over to Pat. I mean, the discussions we've had with the Commission are that they're looking at the current draft programme. They're looking at in relation to the regulations that the Commission itself has. The inter-service consultation is essentially the different departmental bits of the Commission will look at it from their narrow perspective. So, for example, regional employment, etc. Now, they have some comments back in particular areas of the Peace programme that they want some more detail on. It's very the current set of programmes are very outcome focused, and they want to see what the outcomes you intend to achieve, the targets you intend to achieve, and how you intend to achieve that, and they interrogate it in some detail and some depth. The Peace itself has been caught up in the round of negotiations that take place within the European Parliament in relation to the budget. Money that was allocated for the budget for the programmes last year has to be carried over into this year if the programme itself has not been adopted. Peace was not adopted, therefore the money that was voted for Peace for last year, the Parliament and the Commission, the Council have to agree that that budget will be agreed for this year. We've shown increasing signs that the Parliament itself is taking a greater interest in the level of spend and may take the opportunity to try and renegotiate some aspects of that. That could delay the process. We're hoping, and from certainly our conversation with officials, we're indicating that if it were possible, they will seek to offer a letter of comfort, and that would be where we have agreed the detail principles of the programme itself with the Commission. They're broadly content with it. There may be some finer details to work through, and the multi-annual financial framework has to be agreed, the budget. But it's essentially in principle they would be saying to us that you could go ahead with the programme, and in those circumstances you may be able to go for calls. Our expectation is that the fair wind, that might be achievable before the end of March, but perhaps into April is more likely. In those circumstances, there would be a call shortly afterwards, but I think one of the things that people raise is whether or not there are going to be issues with gap funding. And I think, as we've pointed out before at previous committee meetings, essentially these are self-contained programmes. The programme that finishes, that Pat is talking about, the closure, it is coming to an end, and it is not about it will carry on to the next programme. The current programme that we're currently negotiating with the Commission is a new programme, and as such, it's about new projects that come forward or new themes that come forward. It's not about continuation of funding. There's no expectation in the Commission that there is continuation of funding.
How does the 36-week target compare with other jurisdictions in terms of both programmes, and what, if there is difficulty in meeting those targets, what flexibility is there for yourselves? And
maybe I can take that, Chair.
yeah.
I've been on the record here in the House in saying that the average across these kind of programmes, cross-border programmes, is between 26 weeks, sometimes a little bit more. 36 weeks actually compares very, very favourably, if you like, generally. It's on the margins of sort of the longer side. But if we can achieve the 36 weeks, it'll be a significant improvement from the past. And the great thing that it does is it brings predictability to the process, because we will publish in advance the dates for the calls of proposals and the dates on which the steering committees in relation to those calls for proposals will be held, so that people will know when they put in their application that the decision will be taken on such and such a date. And they will have those dates in advance for quite a number of the calls. There is quite a bit of detail, though, in terms of just making sure that we don't create any additional complexity for ourselves within those 36 weeks, and that's what we're discussing with the departments at the moment in terms of just the finer points of that. Basically, we're looking at a situation here is that final decision, according to the regulations, on allocations of monies to project applications is taken by the steering committee. Steering committee is set up by the monitoring committee and includes representatives of accountable departments, other government departments, member states, and other necessary sort of players, and that final decision should be taken by the steering committee, and that there should also be just one assessment process, not two different assessment processes. Those are the principles we're bringing to the table on this.
And it would be good if there is predictability brought to the process, but I suppose the flip side is if things are tight and there is slippage with the 36 weeks, then there isn't that predictability. So how did you come to the 36 figure, and how big a challenge is it?
Well, it's a two-stage process, Chairman. The first one is a 0 to 12-week process, which is essentially an initial assessment of applications that come in to see whether or not they meet the criteria.
Is that separate?
That would be done. No, that's part and parcel of the 36-week process. So looking at that is to make a quick decision in relation to whether someone is eligible or to go forward or not, so that people will know with a degree of certainty quite early on whether or not there is a likelihood that their application will be taken forward. They're given a period then to work up in more detail the application itself. It'd probably be a bit akin to outline planning permission versus full planning permission, if you want to use that analogy. So the idea would be that within that 12-week period, you know whether or not there's a likelihood of going forward. You have a period to work up more detail on your programme, and then the next stage is a full-blown application, which would be, a decision would be reached within 24 weeks on that aspect of it. So it is a bit of a hybrid, but I think it's in recognition that there's quite a bit of interest in relation to peace and interreg projects. You do get quite a volume of applications, and it's to try and sift out those applications and then give more detailed consideration to those that are considered as runners.
There are provisions in the programme for the monitoring of this process, and the Commission will monitor it very carefully through the monitoring committee. Any deviation from the targets will have to be published on our website with a clear explanation as to why those deviations have happened, and they will have to be signed off by the steering committee. So we were working on the assumption that it's a very, very significant exception from the rule we would be talking about, and 36 weeks is something that we should be sticking to. And that's why the detail of the templates that we use and the procedures and processes and the guidance that we give to applicants and so on is very, very important to get that right now. Because if we don't get that right, there's room for slippage there.
So if we get the letter of comfort and...
Technically what will happen is we would then issue a call for application. That call would go on a certain date, and we'd leave that call open, say, for 30 days, for example, you know. And then once we set a date for the receipt of applications.
The end of the 30 days is the start of the 12
That's
weeks?
it. It's when we receive the applications in, that's the start of your 36 weeks.
Okay, so by the end of the summer, the 12-week period should be finished?
Yep. Your stage 1 application, and people will know by then whether they're still in the game. And then we move on to stage 2, when applicants will be invited to submit a much more detailed business case or business proposal, and we'll have templates and guidance as to what exactly that consists of, what kind of information they have to provide, the level of detail they have to go into, and that then will be subject to assessment, you know, and it's that assessment that will go to the steering committee at the end of the 36, a predefined steering committee date for a decision.
I think the aim is, Chair, that and this is when I've talked to all of the finance directors across all of the different departments, and the aim is to try and ensure that the application form itself sets out sufficient headlines and detail about what is required, so that the information is captured on that, and they don't have to go off, for example, you know, producing 20 or 30 different regional strategies that might have been published and having to refer to those. It's about keeping the information very succinct, very detailed, and commensurate with what you're actually, the amount of money you're looking for.
These calls will be very, very focused this time, so there'll be a different look and feel to the programmes, because what Frank referred to earlier as the results orientation of the programme. Basically, the calls will be going out saying, we are inviting applications for people who feel that they can contribute to the achievement of the following results. And we would like you to demonstrate to us in your application how you are going to contribute to the achievement of these results. So we're not looking for generic sort of setting out strategies and visions and objectives, very focused on the achievement of predefined results. And the payments will be made based on the achievement of those results, as the programme itself will be held to account based on the achievement of those results.
Okay. John?
Thanks, Chair. And it's following on from your own points. This has been a great bugbear of mine. And I think it was actually a commitment you'd given, Frank, a question from myself around, I think I would need to check Hansard, but I think you talked about you would try and get it below 40 weeks. So yeah, congratulations on coming round to the 36 weeks. And I am encouraged to hear that target is set and you're going to, you know, stick to it or endeavour where possible by using things like, you know, much more pre-app and standardised, because there did seem at times to be a slight tension between SEUPB and, you know, DFP, and then when you brought in other government departments or other funding bodies and different levels of economic appraisals. I think, Pat, you here before talked about in other parts of the EU, there are not economic appraisals used for, was it below $1 million?
I've brought this up many times.
And different levels of spend. So have we managed, do you think in moving towards the 36, are you content that we've ironed out most of those?
The big challenge is to meet, number one, I suppose, what programme regulatory requirements are, and they're quite clear, and we've defined those. Secondly, is to make sure that we meet whatever requirements of the Member States or regions within the Member States are in, with Scotland and Northern Ireland and Ireland and Interreg, Northern Ireland and Ireland. And so whatever national rules are. And it's the question of interpreting then just what do we need to do to satisfy those. And in Northern Ireland, there are specific issues outlined in NIGE, guidance on the use of projects and so on. And it's a question of looking at how we actually address those needs. And that's what I'm referring to as the detail of getting this agreed. We have some very clear proposals on the table, which we're discussing, and we're just making sure that there's no loose ends on it and that we have clarity on it. I mean, you're right, the question of economic appraisals is important in terms of the whole thing. And it's an important part of our discussions with the department. That's just how we satisfy whatever Northern Ireland's need is in relation to that. You know,
just from like a perspective of being in the committee, it always seemed that it started off in Brussels, got a bit of gold on it in London, and got the final polish here in Belfast, which tended to look as if were we overcomplicating, and how on earth we got from a period of the European average been 26 weeks to we were at 56 weeks, I think, was our...
I think let's set that in context, John. The issue, I think, if you actually look at the previous programme, 2007 to 13, 2007, whenever the programme's launched, we have the administration here, the new departments are set up, new ministers are involved, civil servants becoming to terms with what the policies are within the departments. So I think in the early stages, when you looked at the figure of 56 weeks that was often quoted, I think you actually look at that, and I've done quite a bit of analysis of that. It was in the early stages of the programme, particularly where that was occurring. And I think what was happening was it was indicative of issues were coming in, the application process was going through, details were coming in, people were uncertain about some of the strategies and indeed what ministers' views or departments' views would be in certain areas. And so that in that early stage there was certainly a long time taken to make decisions. But there were a couple of calls then subsequent to that. And I think if you actually look at the most recent one, which was 2011, there was an ISRA study of that one, and the figure was actually closer to 40 weeks. So it was coming down already. And I think this is but an extension of that. And I think it's important to point out that our aim is that the 36 weeks should be a maximum of 36 weeks. And as Pat has said, where there is going to be an exception to that, and it may well happen that you get a particularly complex or sensitive project coming forward, we'll publish why that's going to happen. And the Commission indeed expect that. We'll have to report back to the Commission on our performance in relation to that. And indeed, I'm sure the Committee will take a very close interest in this.
Yeah, I do appreciate, and I do certainly I will have an interest, as I'm sure colleagues will, around those targets been met in getting the programmes out, you know, while scrutinised robustly, but getting that out into communities. And finally, just to wish you well, Pat. Certainly any dealings I've had with you both in the committee and as a member of this assembly have been professional and courteous, and to wish you well in your retirement. Thank you, Chair.
If I may, Chair, just add very briefly, and just to add on to what Frank has said. I mentioned earlier that we've 112 million euro to spend this year on the 2 old programmes that are closing out. That is a direct result of the length of time it has taken us to actually get approvals for those projects, because they're all being sort of back-ended, you know. That is something that we really should not be allowing to happen in programmes going forward. That's Frank's point, ground running. And so, and I think, take your point about 2007 case as well in terms. I think this is what we need to get right. Have that back-ended sort of backlog of projects to spend at the end of the programme period. Thank you, John.
Can I just tease out as well, I mean, what were the turnaround times for both projects separately, Interreg and Peace, in terms of the previous?
There was no major difference between the two of them, really.
Okay, so there's problems with both?
There was, yeah.
Okay, so pretty.
There was, yeah.
Okay, so why were they so similar?
Well, I think it's simply the process itself that was followed through. Chair, I mean, the issue was, I think as Pat has said, that there were economic appraisals being done by departments. So what was happening, the information was being gathered from the project. I think often, and Pat, you can keep me right in this one because it's before my time, the consultants were asked to do an appraisal of a particular project which they produced. But that then was submitted to the department for consideration. But in some cases, the consultants went for, even on quite a small project, very, very detailed assessment. And having given an assessment that could be hundreds of pages long, that then goes to departmental economists who then raise all sorts of questions. And it goes into what I can often refer to as an iterative loop. It just goes around, and one question is asked, which gives rise to another question, and back and forth. We're trying to cut that out, and I think in this process we've aimed to do that. We focused in on what are the key strategic elements that need to be addressed up front. Why are you doing a project? And it comes down to common sense in many ways, that it is, we're looking for projects that are value for money. We're looking for projects that have demonstrated need. We're looking for projects that are showing that they actually meet what are required by the EU regulations, that fit within the strategy of the departments overall, and that are going to produce results. That's it in essence. And so a lot of the, I think it's cutting out the guff in some cases, if I could use that terminology. I think in the past, consultants, perhaps not being familiar with the programme, or indeed departmental attitudes, lumped all the strategies that they could find that could possibly be relevant to a particular project. What we're saying now is you don't need to do that. If you're going for a project that is a particular locality, you justify it on the basis of why you've chosen that particular option and how it fits with the programme that the Commission itself has agreed and broader departmental strategy. It doesn't have to go down to the nth detail of every single strategy that has ever been written.
Chair, can I add? I think the key thing here is to eliminate the need for or the tendency towards two different assessment processes. There should be one single assessment process designed by the programme in consultation with the Member States and accountable departments and the Commission, and that single assessment process should be robust enough to satisfy the needs of everybody who needs to be satisfied in relation to this. And this is where the problem arose in the previous programme, is that JTS, SUB were doing their own assessment in line with agreed procedures, but then when it went to accountable departments, a new assessment was starting. And frequently it went back to the very beginning. Why do we have this OP? Why is that particular objective in there? Why are we doing this? That's what was taking an awful lot of time. And I think the integrity of the decision-making structures that are designed and included in a programme that has been agreed by the two Member States and by the Commission needs to be respected, and it needs to be given the robustness and strength that it needs to be able to get on with the business of doing this and account for it then afterwards and be accountable and responsible for it. And it's important that accountable departments are an integral part of that process. But it should not be separate from and different from, any assessment that goes. That's one of the key things.
And in terms of one of the earlier points that you made, Chairman, that why differential, for example, delegation limits. Well, I mean, ministers for different departments have determined that because they're using match funding and they will be accountable to that, they have determined what level of risk their department is prepared to take. And we have to respect that. And in our case, we have different delegation limits within DFP, and we operate to those. But across different departments who may well be putting the policy competent department for a particular area, it will have its own means of deciding what it's prepared to fund and how it's prepared to fund it. And again, that's a matter we need to respect.
Pat has made earlier reference to the result and output focus of the new programmes, and I think that should greatly help us in expediting the assessment of projects. The programmes, as approved, contain very explicit results and outputs with quantified targets against them. Those with the corresponding budget allocations have been agreed by the relevant government departments and the Northern Ireland Executive and the Irish Government. So any applications that are coming forward will be assessed by the special EU programmes body within that context. And therefore, when that project assessment is forwarded to the relevant government department, it is within the context of predefined budget allocation and result and output targets, and we think that should greatly assist the accountable department in making a very speedy decision on the merit or otherwise of any particular project. So I think we are working in an amended and changed EU regulatory environment, and with goodwill from all the players on this side, there is no reason why we should not be able to meet those 36 weeks targets. But it will depend on the commitment of all the players in the assessment process and focus on achieving those 36 weeks, but it should be possible to do so.
Would it be possible for the committee to see a process map or graph showing how this has been put down to a single process now?
No, that's not a problem. Some of the finer details of it, as I said, are still being ironed out with the departments, and I prefer to have a clearer signed off position in relation to some of those details before we share it with you.
So can we get that as
very happy to
signed off?
Okay. I think it's important.
Yeah. Leslie?
Yes, thank Chair, and good morning, gentlemen. Moving on from the actual time frame, I wonder, could you share with us just how or what rationale or strategy produces the various amounts and the various objectives for both programmes? How did you split them all?
Sean has been...
Yeah, we have went through a very extensive public consultation process. We have consulted twice on the programme in 2012 and in 2014. Running alongside those public consultation events, we had very in-depth discussions with all the relevant government departments, both within Northern Ireland and in Ireland and in Scotland. And through that process, and also within the context of the EU regulations, we then distilled out a set of specific objectives and allocated money towards those. Fundamental to the allocation of money is the Commission requires that we achieve impact on those themes and sectors that we invest in. So we have to have sufficient critical mass within any particular policy area to ensure that we're doing sufficient activity that can produce impact. And that basically is the principle of concentration. The Commission insists that all EU programmes in this programming period are what they call concentrated, which is a limited number of policy areas with corresponding budget allocation to them with a sufficient scale to produce impact. So it was through that type of iterative process of public consultation and with the government, the departments being intimately involved within that EU policy context is how the budget allocations emerged.
Is there any paper setting out the working out of this strategy that we could have a look at?
The strategy is basically outlined in the document, the operational programme for the two.
It's all broad brush, so I'm just wondering how we ended up with these specific amounts, specific areas.
We went through an extended iterative process with numerous draft programmes and discussions with all the relevant players, and it was through that process we came to a settled view on the budget allocations across the programme, mindful of the requirement of this concept of concentration, of allocating sufficient money to achieve impact.
How did you get the draft programmes and how did you quantify the draft programme?
The programmes were, we identified the particular specific objectives within the regulatory framework. We also have to bear in mind that the regulation gave us a field of 11 themes that we could operate within. So the regulations were already quite focused, and out of those 11 themes for the Interreg programme, we had to choose only 4 themes. So there was a regulatory imperative for concentration immediately. We went out to public consultation and we asked the public and other interested stakeholders what themes were the most appropriate to address the needs on a cross-border basis. And that is the process that we went through. And then, mindful of the total budget that was allocated to the programme, we then made a judgment as to what would be the appropriate allocation to each theme.
Okay, would you explain that judgment? I think we'll get...
Can I just say on that, then those indicative figures were then subject to a second public consultation. Yeah. So we made those indicative figures and our judgment available to the public, and that were the figures in the budget allocations that was then subject to a public consultation.
Let me just add on to what Sean is saying.
No, you're not answering my question.
And that's precisely what I want to try and do.
Figures, please.
The indicative figures that are in the operational programmes were arrived at, as Sean says, as a process of quite thorough and exhaustive consultation. The process itself was overseen by a programme development steering group, which contained representatives of all the key sort of stakeholders in relation to this whole thing, and proposals were put forward to them. We also investigated and identified what kind of project pipeline would be out there for each specific themes of the particular sort of investment objectives. And based on an assessment of the capacity to absorb the recommendations were made from ourselves to the Programme Development Steering Committee and subsequently to 2 member states for them to take a look at whether that sort of balance was correct. And it was only in consultation with the member states, Programme Development Steering Group, that we actually arrived at an allocation.
must be a rationale. I'm not getting it from this morning. And there's no document that shows that particular paper trail of how we ended up with the numbers 50.4 for Objective 2, 90 for Objective 3 is set. That's
Ultimately, it's going.
That.
Ultimately, Leslie, it's going to. It comes down to number one, the selection of investment priorities. Within that, specific objectives for each of those priorities, and then you need to tie that to specific potential projects that actually are capable of absorbing those. So, for example, I mean, if you look at young people, you know, there are X number of people in particular categories of young people out there, and we've worked with the various departments and with various other key stakeholders to say, well, what sort of engagement would be needed and what sort of scale would be needed. And in terms of an overall balance across the programme, we've come up with recommendations and suggestions, which are again put out there to be tested and to be critically evaluated by people in particular roles, based on their advice back to us that those sums are. Is that fair enough?
Yeah. Really extrapolated it then, Pat, what you're saying is you extrapolated those sort of notions that you had to make them into an exact science.
I don't know what you mean by extrapolated.
I don't know a lot of what you said. It's all mumbo jumbo. But there's no paper anyway. There's no way we can check, for example, that those numbers are in the right book.
The paper process that's involved is the huge amount of consultation paperwork that's available. It's all available on our website. The reports and minutes of our Programme Development Steering Group, which are on the record, our meetings with the various government departments and with the 2 member states in relation to the whole process. So it's a well-documented process, hugely documented process. I actually write at the actual numbers themselves is a process, as I say, of what sort of priorities are emerging in our consultation, and then what capacity is there to actually engage, what capacity is there to actually absorb this money.
That's subjective.
No, that's not subjective. That's based on sort of research.
Objective.
It's research that we have done in terms of a project pipeline for each one of these themes.
We can't see that.
But the research is done, is fed in through our whole consultation process. And you can see it in the minutes
we
of
can't
our programme
scrutinise that.
development.
That's my point. There's no point in using a lot of words to fill the space. We can't scrutinise that particular process.
Well, I've been involved in designing and developing EU programmes since 1978. I can't find any better way of doing this. I've been a long time at this.
I'm not asking you with respect what you think. I'm asking you, I'm telling you what I think.
Right.
You'd like to be able to scrutinise that, because that's the basis of the whole exercise. But that's as far as we're going to get by looks at in the meantime.
Deputy Chair.
Thanks. Morning. You mentioned there that the series of pre-application development workshops would be held in February, March of this year. Have they begun?
No, they're due to start towards the end of next week, I think it is, towards the end of February they commence.
And have they been advertised already?
We have advertised them. Sorry, we have advertised on our website, and we have done a mailing out to a very large number of people, running into thousands of different groups and organisations who had previously expressed interest in programmes.
Right. And what, I mean, if there are groups out there that have never been involved in application before, how would they know about?
Well, we will publicise these very well. It'll be on our website, but it'll also be in the national media. We will make aware that these events are on, and we would appreciate assistance from members of the Assembly here and of the committee. If you know of groups and individuals and of communities that haven't engaged with us, well, by all means, please approach us and tell us. That's what we've been doing for years, and we continue to do that.
So, you know, if there were groups who had never been involved in the process before, would that be the first step for them to attend one of these pre-application workshops?
I think it would be very useful for them to do it, because they'll get the overview. They get a picture of what the programme structure is like, what the programme will expect from anybody who's making an application for it. But certainly, I have done this many times in the past, so I would be happy to meet with representatives to explain the process in more detail if that would be helpful. So if you know of any particular groups, we've done it many times before.
Well, thanks.
What certainty exists in relation to the additional €15 million from the European Territorial Cooperation budget to the United Youth Programme under PEACE?
As you know, Chair, the Economic Pact announced the additional €50 million from the UK's European Territorial Cooperation allocation. That was then placed over for the peace programme. The issue there is that the European Territorial Cooperation Programme, like the ad said, it's in the name, it's territorial cooperation, and therefore we are expected to work across border with our colleagues to ensure that we come up with a programme that satisfies the European Commission's views of what should be done as well. The intention was, in that particular allocation, was that it support Together Building a United Community, and specifically, where appropriate, the United Youth Strategy. And that's exactly where we are at the moment. We are working with DEL, very closely with DEL and our counterparts in the Republic, to ensure that the United Youth Strategy is a programme that not only benefits the people with no education, employment or training skills in Northern Ireland, but also in the Republic, so that in fact what happens is that the programme itself will have definite outcomes that satisfies what the European Commission wants, that the 50 million will be allocated and show what targets it's intended to meet in relation to that, and that it's on a shared basis. So we're working with DEL to ensure that their detail satisfies the European Commission in that respect, and that's one of the reasons why we've been having the discussions with Europe recently.
And aside from Pat, when will we see you again?
Oh, well, whenever the committee wants to see me again, I will.
Could you brief us again then before the summer, before...
Certainly.
As the process goes on, Peter?
Sure, I appreciate it. Forgive me then, I was just to follow up on Dominic's issue just in relation to particularly groups that haven't been involved. He talked about the rollout, workshops and that type of thing. Obviously, some concerns expressed over the spread of those. Have you expanded those in terms of the numbers and locations?
Well, we started off with an initial, what did we have? I think it was 8 altogether that we had put out, 8 different venues. But our intention was that we would test demand. Each one of those 8 has now been filled. There's no more spaces in them. So we've actually added a few extra locations as well. It has always been our intention to do so. So if there's additional demand, well, we will look at that.
Sorry, just to expand, just to clarify. Yeah. And I appreciate it. It's good to hear that you've added to them. How many have you added? What's the number there? And I just noticed, to pick up Dominic's point on the sort of the workshop that you mentioned, maybe I'm not finding it, mentioned about on the SEUPB website.
Yeah.
And I look and I couldn't find any direct reference to the consultation things on it, any details of that.
This is a work in progress, Peter. It's developing as we work.
I couldn't even find any reference to the original yet, let alone that bit. So as we move into and appreciate into an age particularly where social media websites are a lot more important in relation to it. I'm just sort of saying that there may be a degree of oversight on it. There didn't appear to be. If you're user-friendly for anybody who's looking at stuff, it didn't appear to be particularly user-friendly in that regard. But in terms of the 8, I suppose if you could maybe give us the details, I appreciate you don't have them just directly to hand, but if you could maybe send it to the committee, the indications of where it is.
Well, I can tell you the additional locations are Belfast, Ballymena and Armagh, right? In addition to Omagh, Enniskillen, Derry, Londonderry, Belturbet, Carlingford, Skenos in East Belfast, Corrymeela, Ballycastle and one in Glasgow. So there's 11 different.
Nothing in, for instance, the North Down of Strangford?
North Down of Strangford. If there was a demand for something in North Down of Strangford, we're very happy to talk to people to do that.
Yeah, but with respect on it, people don't particularly know what's happening in the first place if it's a range of things. I think to be fair to simply say if there's demand for cater for it as opposed to setting up a range, and is it really good enough? And I think you should be looking at least somewhere in that.
Okay.
In that
point taken. Thank you, Peter.
Asking somebody to take that away.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Kayla?
My question is very simple. First of all, I want to congratulate you on the work you've done to date, Pat, and wish you well in your retirement. My question, as I say, is very simple. I'm meeting a group tomorrow morning in my own area. They're a small group of individuals who have got together and formed childcare facilities in terms of playgroups, things like that. It's a quite rural area. It's an area between Strabane and Sion Mills that I represent. It sits in the border region as well, so they're very well placed. They're obviously they're self-sufficient up until now, but they're finding it very difficult because of the demand that they're trying to in quite a rural area, north and south. So they're actually looking some sort of financial assistance. Can I tell them tomorrow this is where they want to be looking? Or is this something outside of the remit in terms of children and young people?
Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
Obviously, I can't talk about the individual case without knowing all the details of it. As the programmes are currently constituted, we would not see ourselves funding the direct provision of places within preschool activity. If the activity had perhaps peace and reconciliation type of outcomes, there may be potential for it within some strands of the programme. I would emphasise again the important role that we see of local authorities playing in the programme going forward, and we will be asking the local authorities north and south to develop peace action plans. And we will be publishing details of those in the next number of weeks. And for many of the smaller groups, probably their easiest access to the programme will be through their local authority rather than from us directly. So we would particularly encourage smaller groups to keep very, very close to the new councils and to become aware of the process the councils are going to be engaged in as they go about drafting their peace action plans for their local areas.
Thank you, Sean. As I say, I understand that. I'm quite close to my own local authority in terms of this. But you know, if they were to see something like this and the buzzwords are in there, children, young people, areas of disadvantages, you could understand why they would feel that they could be included in that. No, thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Okay, members. Okay, Pat, can I wish you all the best for the future and your retirement? Thank you. And if you're looking for employment, I know a couple of community groups. And
I'm no good at writing applications.
Chair, would you like me to liaise with the committee clerk about the reappearance?
Absolutely, that'd be fantastic. Thanks, Frank.
Will do.
Okay, all the best.
Thank you very much.
Okay, members can seek agreement to copy the briefing paper to the other applicable committees, given its cross-cutting interest. Moving on, SR 322015, valuation for rating decapitalisation rate rigs in 2015, pages 34 to 41, subject to negative resolution, and the statutory period expires on the 9th of March. I can inform members that the meeting on the 21st of January, the committee was briefed by officials. Members were content with the proposal. Departments confirmed there have been no changes to the overall policy as the initial proposals were submitted. I can refer members to the Examiner Statutory Rules report, which covers this SR at table of papers. The Examiner is raising no points, so if members are content, I'll put the question that the committee has considered SR 322015 valuation for rating decapitalisation rate regulations NI 2015 and has no objection to the rule. Agreed?
Agreed.
SR 46215 rates owner allowances order NI 2015, pages 43 to 49 of your packs. Has been laid in the business office by DFP for affirmative resolution. It was members were briefed on the 21st of January. Members were then content with the proposal. There's been no changes since. Can I refer members to the Examiner Statutory Rules report at table of papers, and he is raising no points about the rule to waive technical scrutiny. So members are content with that. I'll put the question that the committee has considered SR 46/2015, the rates owner allowances order NI 2015, recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly. Agreed? Rates exemption for automatic telling machines in rural areas order NI 2015, pages 51 to 56. It's been laid in the business office as subject to affirmative resolution. We were briefed on the 14th of January in regard to this. Members were content with the proposal. Departments confirmed there have been no changes to the policy since. The Examiner's report is at table of papers and he is raising no points about it. Members are again content with the question that the committee has considered SR 47/2015, the rates exemption for automatic telling machines in rural areas order NI 2015, and recommends it be affirmed by the Assembly. Agreed?
Agreed.
The rates temporary rebate amendment order 2015, pages 58 to 64 of your packs. It's been laid in the Business Office subject to affirmative resolution. We were briefed on the 14th of January. Members were then content and the Department have made no changes. And the Examiner of Statutory Rules report is a table of papers and he's raising no points. Members are content with the question. When it is considered SR 48/2015, the Rates Temporary Rebate Amendment Order NI 2015, and recommends it be affirmed by the Assembly. Agreed?
Agreed.
Public Service Pensions Valuations and Employer Cost Cap Amendment Directions NI 2015, pages 66 to 71. For members that DFP proposes to make the above named amending directions under powers conferred by the Public Service Pensions Act NI 2014. On the 26th of November, DFP published valuation and employer cost cap directions for the public service pension schemes. The directions establish a common approach to valuation and cost control processes across the public service schemes. The amendments will update technical references for scheme valuation processes in respect of the local government pension scheme and the firefighters pension scheme. Can I advise members that the directions are not subject to Assembly procedure and are for noting only. Any points members want to raise in regard to that? Okay, enough. Okay, moving on to correspondence.
Okay,
thanks,
sure. Just run through a few items of correspondence for committees. Page 74 of the pack, the Minister's writing to the committee with a copy of the latest copy of the draft Legal Complaints and Regulation Bill. It's just for members to note that the Minister has asked for that to be treated on an in-confidence basis. But the bill will be coming to the committee formally in due course in terms of the legislative processes. Then at page 210, there's a response from DFP to the issue that arose from correspondence received from Peter Fitzpatrick Limited in Hilltown Quarrying Company that had raised concerns around pre-qualification criteria being applied in public procurement tendering opportunities. So the department has set out the kind of good practice approach and general policy on this issue. The specific issue relates more to the remit of the Regional Development Committee because Transport NI falls within that committee's remit. So, Chair, so it's just to seek agreement to copy the DFP response to both to Peter Fitzpatrick Limited and for information, and also to the Regional Development Committee for its information as well, given the relevance to the specific issue.
Okay, great.
Then there's correspondence at page 239. It's a departmental response to issues that had arose in relation to a legislative consent motion relating to the Small Business Enterprise and Employment Bill that the committee had previously considered. This was around the issue of the public servants who made redundant re-entering the public sector. And the First Division Association Trade Union for the Senior Civil Servants had raised some concerns, so there's a departmental response to that, and it's really if the committee's content enough to forward that on to the FDA for information.
Agreed.
There's correspondence at page 243 from the department in relation to follow-up correspondence the committee had asked in relation to LPS actionable debt recovery. There is a session scheduled with LPS on the 18th of March, so it's for noting in the meantime, and there's a strategy on this area which is due, so there'll be an update provided on the 18th of March. Then there's correspondence from the department at page 246 of the pack in relation to DOJ Savings Delivery Plan. There was an issue that the committee had raised regarding the NIPS staff exits shortfall, and the department's responding to that, so it's for copying on to the Justice Committee for information, Chair.
Great.
And then there's correspondence from the department at page 248 in response to the committee's concerns around late papers and responses to requests for information from the committee arriving late from the department. So there is a new process that has been introduced following the committee's last consideration of this issue, Chair, whereby each week the committee staff and the departmental liaison staff sign off the statistics in terms of late papers, so that there's verifiable reports. Then the first report under the new system will be due in May, and the committee has previously decided that it would keep open the option of bringing holding oral hearings with poor performing business areas in this regard in terms of late papers. So it's for noting in the meantime, and there's that option going forward in terms of bringing business areas up for explanation. And there's at page 249, there's DFP correspondence relating to the Enterprise Shared Services performance against business plan targets. It's to note, pending an oral evidence session with the Enterprise Shared Services of business plan targets on the 25th of March. And then just picking out other pieces of correspondence for attention, there at page 270, there's correspondence from the OFM-DFM committee regarding the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. And it doesn't appear to relate to the DFP remit in any way, Chair, but just maybe to check, because the OFM-DF committee is seeking responses from the other statutory committees, but if the committee is content enough for us to write to DFP just to check in case the department had comments previously on the bill.
Agreed.
Then there's correspondence at page 284 from the Consumer Council in follow-up to the committee had raised queries the last briefing session from the Consumer Council regarding banking issues. The committee had sought data, for example, on credit union membership and offices across the province, and the Consumer Council have come back with that information and some other information. The members will recall the Consumer Council proposed that a stakeholder event be held on banking issues, and had asked that this committee and the ETI committee consider sponsoring that, and the council had offered to arrange the event. So committee staff were meeting with the Consumer Council officials in the next week, I think it is, Chair, just to discuss the options in that regard. But in the meantime, if the committee was agreed that this correspondence can be copied to the ETI committee for information.
Agreed.
Then there's correspondence at page 288 from the Association of Professional Injury Lawyers regarding, it's the issue of bereavement damages, and the association has raised some concerns regarding aspects of the current system for bereavement damages, and has pointed to a delay in DFP following through on its consultation on this broader area, which closed in August 2012. Also raises some issues for DOJ. So the suggestion is, Chair, that the committee writes to seek an update from the department, from DFP and DOJ on the issue, and also copies of correspondence advises the Justice Committee and the Association accordingly. Then finally, there's correspondence on page 290 from a member of the public regarding the Northern Ireland Housing Executive pay increment delay. And there was a similar issue came to the committee previously, and I think it was 2013. And at that point, the DFP advised that the delay had been caused due to errors in the original business case that it had received from the housing executive. So it's just that correspondence is copied in as well for background. So it's just to check if the committee wished to seek forward the correspondence to DFP for a response on this latest issue.
Agreed.
I'd raised this with because I'm sure we're all getting these emails. So I think there was an issue over the contractual entitlement. So I think legal advice has just been by the department, which so it seems it's not too far away from being sorted, but we better get it right than anything.
And then, Chair, there's correspondence from the department regarding the OECD review, and they're inviting yourself along to an event on Monday, and some chairs of some of the other assembly committees have also been invited to provide input based on committee position on various issues. So just really to seek formal agreement from the committee for that input, and obviously if the date doesn't suit, there might be an rescheduled or an alternative date offered.
Agreed.
That's all the correspondence, Chair.
Committee work programme then, pages 294 to 297. Can I advise members that when liaising with the Scottish Finance Committee to develop an itinerary for a potential committee visit to Edinburgh, that the committee staff have been alerted to the potential fallout from the general election impacting on the visit. The most convenient options that have been identified would be 20 to 21st of May or 27th to 28th of May. What days are those?
Wednesday and Thursday.
Wednesday and Thursday. The intention would be that the working draft of the committee's review paper would be available beforehand, and that other issues could be covered during the visit. For example, briefing from Scottish officials on measuring well-being and on budget process and scrutiny issues. Are members content then to proceed on that basis?
Yep.
Okay, an email will be issued to members in the coming days asking about availability, and that will need to be confirmed before the business case is finalised for approval and costs incurred. The voluntary exit scheme can advise members that the committee will receive a briefing from the Department at its meeting next week on the voluntary exit scheme in advance of its formal launch on the 2nd of March. Can I seek agreement to commission an Assembly research paper on comparative approaches of similar exit schemes in other jurisdictions in order to inform the committee of any key lessons arising from such schemes? Agreed? Agreed. I advise members that in line with approaches being taken in other legislators, 3 other Assembly committees have developed Twitter accounts, and these are proving useful in raising awareness of their work. The committee staff have gained advice and information on their experience and lessons to date. So can I seek agreement that the committee staff proceed to establish a committee Twitter account for the purpose of running a pilot exercise and reporting back to the committee with proposals in that regard? Agreed?
What would we actually be doing there? I mean,
playing our computer.
Not a tape. Just to spell it out.
Sure, with the other committees, basically is sending out information of what the committee's considering the next week, advanced information.
What about engagement with a larger population?
Yeah, and other approaches that have been taken, Chair, in terms of, for example, if there's committee inquiries, some of the committees have been able to use Twitter to send out links to surveys and get information and views from stakeholders. So obviously it takes time to build up the follower base, but you know.
Two sides to that, of course, it can be obstructive as well. Anyway, we'll try it.
On the pilot.
Being done by the communications office. Anyway, I mean, they often will post out, you know, what's on the order paper, what's coming up in committees. Is it something additional we need to do, or should we be asking them if they got the capacity to do
I think it's important that the committee sort of asserts itself more. And it's not only just what papers and what Hansard copies are coming out, but maybe photographs of proceedings or quotes from questions that members are putting to certain officials that will be relevant to members of the public. You know, I mean, I think that session today with SEUPB and the department, a lot of community groups, and that would be interested to know what they're saying. So it might be an opportunity in that regard.
We learned a lot there, didn't we?
An awful lot.
Even actually build up a Twitter page, like having that, the dates and times of their meetings that they're doing around, you know, useful information to put out.
Okay, any other business? Next meeting will be Wednesday, 25th of February at 10 a.m.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.